The year was 1956. Republican Dwight David Eisenhower would be re-elected president, convincingly defeating Adlai Stevenson. The Federal Highway Act passed Congress and authorized the construction of nearly 41,000 miles of new highways. Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal, which led to a crisis in the Middle East. Warsaw Pact nations, led by the Soviet Union, invaded Hungary to crush a freedom revolution. Alabama bus segregation laws are declared unconstitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court. Elvis Presley breaks onto the U.S. record chart for the first time with Heartbreak Hotel. And in a related note, parents around the world are stunned and appalled by their children's infatuation with something called rock and roll. The average cost of a new house was $11,700. The average American yearly wage earned was $4,500, and gas cost a mere 22 cents per gallon. And on the campus of Wyoming Seminary, a young man would report for the first time to teach freshman civics and government courses. But 3 years hence, this diminutive man would land in the English classroom, a home he would occupy for a remarkable additional 51 years. This man's name's Harry J. Nageli, and his 54-year professional tenure at Wyoming Seminary is the third longest in history, eclipsed only by Dr. Levi Sprague's remarkable 68 years and Willis Dean's 60. I stand before you today to share some of the life of Mr. Nageli, as sadly, at the age of 85, he passed away peacefully on April 4th. Born in Scranton and a graduate of the University of Scranton, both undergrad and graduate school, Harry Nageli spent his entire post-college life living on the Wyoming Seminary campus. An incredible 30 plus of those years were spent in Dart, but mostly Carpenter Hall as a dorm parent. And up until his move to a nursing home just recently, Harry lived on Maple Ave, still close to the school he called home for nearly all of his life. During his storied career, Mr. Nageli taught the span of the English curriculum, advised the yearbook, the senior class, and a number of clubs. And while I am quite sure that he attended many sporting events during his over 5-decade teaching career, I can unequivocally state that he attended the vast majority of the school's theater, concert, and dance performances. He served as a valuable mentor to numerous younger faculty members, helping them stabilize and grow from their fledgling beginning teaching careers. A lifelong learner, he undertook many summers of educational growth by taking courses at the University of London and various Oxford colleges. He was a voracious reader, which served to make his writing amongst the most polished on this campus. If you were a student at Wyoming Seminary in the 70s, 80s, or 90s, it is quite possible that your first summer trip overseas was joined by Mr. Nageli as a chaperone. Eastern and Western Europe were his favorites, but he also traveled to the Soviet Union and China. Mr. Nageli was known for his rapier, sometimes biting wit, for his impeccable wardrobe, and for his ability to make literature of all genres come alive in the classroom. He was our resident curmudgeon at times, but anything he did or said that was negative was said with a twinge of love and a healthy hint of respect. In the 90s, SEM began a teacher-intern program, bringing 3 to 5 first-year teachers to campus for what was in most cases to be a 1-year experience. This prompted the cynical side of Harry to emerge, often stating that he would get to learn their names if, and only if, they returned for a second year. However, he was quietly serving behind the scenes as a role model and a mentor for those young souls, particularly if they were teaching in the humanities. He disdained ceremony, although he was the faculty marshal for several commencement ceremonies. But in true Harry fashion, when at a meeting with marshals one year, I mentioned the pending addition of the international flags to the procession, Harry cringed and said, quote, "What's next, God-forsaken bagpipes?" They might be coming, Mr. Vita, by the way. He had a healthy disdain for administrators, too. That will come as no surprise to some of my colleagues. And many of us were forced to weather a softly spoken jab every once in a while. His most quotable line, truly evincing his disgust in something, was, and I've edited this for a bit for the assembly, quote, "I don't give a rat's rear end about that," end quote. That was all Harry being Harry, and because of who he was and how things were said, we could all get a good laugh out of it. Perhaps Mr. Nageli's most amazing gift, his true genius savant characteristic, was his uncanny ability to remember so many former students by name, and also so much about each and every one of them. His career spanned family generations. He taught my 5 aunts in the early 60s. He taught me in the late 70s. And then, although he did not have the fortune to teach 2 of my children, 2 of them were enrolled on this campus while he was still teaching. In a few short weeks, we will be passing out awards on campus. Many of these awards are named after the true legends from the 175-year history of the school. They are the true shoulders that all of us stand upon as we continue the legacy of great teaching at Wyoming Seminary. Mr. Nageli served as a true bridge to that venerable past. When he arrived on campus, Wyoming Seminary was just a mere 112 years old, yet another testament to the career that was so important to the growth and sustainability of the school. As word of Mr. Nageli's death spread to the alumni constituency, tributes began to pour in. Here are 4 excerpts. Mr. Nageli was a wonderful teacher. One of my fondest memories was attending a parent-teacher conference for my son, Mark, who was one of his students. I was waiting in the hallway for my appointment when Mr. Nageli walked out and said to me, "You, get in here now." Other parents looked at him in disbelief, and he retorted, "I can speak this way to my former students." Second, I last saw Mr. Nageli when I was on campus for a meeting in 2002. He looked at me and said, "Hello, John. Are you still writing poetry?" I couldn't remember what I had for breakfast that day, but Mr. Nageli, who had not seen me in over 30 years, remembered my name and my love for poetry. That was Harry Nageli. A third, I thought Mr. Nageli was wonderful, delightful sense of humor. Saw him last year as my sister and I were driving around SEM. He was sitting on some front porch steps. We stopped, got out of the car, and had a visit with him. He still remembered us both and that we were sisters, although he taught us in 2 different decades. A treasure of a man. And lastly, Mr. Nageli, since you are our sophomore English teacher, we were devoted to you in the classes that you proposed. Your eccentric nature and knowledge that went both deep and wide were so inspiring to all of us. You had arrived in our lives at the perfect moment when we were becoming adults and needed someone like you to show us another path that was not presented to us before. You were the one who wrote a letter of recommendation for me to enter art school. You also joked at the process and discussed the fact that universities ask teachers what sort of leader the student is. And you lamented what a world it would be if it were populated only by leaders. Not only did you know who Robert Mapplethorpe was, you allowed me to write a research paper on him when I was 18. Looking back at this, you were so far ahead of your time. One day, ironically, you were telling us what you wanted your funeral to be like. Your frankness and wit still holds with me today. Your fingerprint has been embedded onto me since. Rest in peace. Mr. Nageli was interviewed for a school journal in 2008. Here, in his own words, are some thoughts on education. Perhaps more than anything I can write or say, his own words express best why he was such a beloved teacher for so long. Quote, "Don't be afraid of the printed word. It can't hurt you. Read anything that strikes your curiosity and intellect. People are people, and the same today as they were in Roman times. They exhibit the same range of emotions, from greed and pride to fear and sorrow to ambivalence and love." Mr. Nageli was awarded the Maslow Award for Excellence in Teaching at Wyoming Seminary in 1987, and in 2014, he was awarded SEM's highest prize, the Distinguished Service Award. To borrow and paraphrase slightly from the graduation address of one of his most beloved colleagues, Mrs. Charlotte Levy, one short epitaph for Mr. Nageli would be, quote, "Harry J. Nageli, 1933-2019. He made his dash count," end quote. Many in this room admired the erudite Harry Nageli. Some, me included, loved him dearly, and all should respect the full life led so well by this man. And I thought as members of this community, as members of the SEM family, that you should all know that. Thank you.